welcome to the State of the Nation. Before we start, let's remind everybody about how good Pace Car Rental is and the wonderful discount that you will get if you go onto their website, use the code SONA to get your next hired car. You know, don't be a mug, use Pace Car Rental. And you are probably watching this because you watched part one of my interview with Mighti Jamie, where we dealt with a lot of the legislation that was passed. We dealt with some of the more controversial stuff. NHI, the National Health Insurance, the BELA Act, the Schools Act, as well as expropriation without compensation. And we got so deep into it that we never got to discuss the really meaty stuff that sent Jamie's channel into overdrive and continues today. And that has been the coverage of the commissions. So let's start off by welcoming Jamie. Jamie, thank you for sticking around for part two.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, the first part was meant to be 5 minutes and it turned out to be nearly an hour, but that's the way it rolls when we get going.
Yeah.
Jamie, we dealt with some of the newsworthy events, and in a South African context, nothing was more newsworthy than that cold winter's day back in July.
Yeah.
When we were all minding our own business, and then there was a press conference, right?
Yes, yes.
And it was Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi, he's the head of the police in KZN, who called a press conference, but it was a bit different to press conferences as we are used to. For starters, it started on time. And secondly, we were met with a whole lot of people in camouflage, looking quite ominous. I've got to say, I didn't like the optics. And there was Mkhwanazi saying that he's got proof of criminality linked to politicians, business people, police, even the judiciary. And he's got proof, and that was the end of the kind of conference, and everybody was left stunned. So stunned that our president rushed into action and a week later addressed the nation saying that he's going to establish commissions. What did you make of that moment?
Well, that was definitely an explosive moment. Watching that and understanding that this is actually going to reshape South Africa. So on the day, I think I had an appreciation that this is not a conference as usual, and it's not policing as usual, and it's not going to be the same South Africa after this conference, because the optics were quite, stark. I mean, it is their licensed uniform. And, I've seen some members of these task teams wearing this. So I wasn't as freaked out. It didn't strike me as a coup, but it did strike me that, okay, the choice of uniform does indicate that they're taking this very seriously, and the nature of the allegations, for him to say, General Sibiya is a criminal, for him to say, that Kunu was implicated, for him to say all of the things that he said, I thought, okay, this is going to be a big story. When we then got the commissions and the various things that were then put into motion, that also indicated that, okay, the response is serious. And on the day, as I listened to the responses to General Mkhwanazi, I actually looked at some of the initial reporting. I thought, okay, he does have prima facie a case here. He's not just pulling this out of thin air, because even back then, there was that parliamentary meeting on the 5th of March, where Mkhwanazi had raised some of these issues and had said that there's this individual, Brown Mogotsi, who has been messaging him and who seems to be friends and associates with the minister. Then the minister tried to poo-poo the idea that he knew the guy at all. And he has since always been playing a game of definition, almost like Bill Clinton saying, well, it depends what you mean by relations.
Yeah.
If you mean this, then I did not have relations.
Yeah.
But if you mean this other thing, then maybe I did have relations. So he's like, oh, it's not my associate, it's not my friend who I smoke with. I'm like, why are we... Anyway, that's a side chat. At the time, I thought, okay, we did see some initial reporting. They leaked some of the evidence in terms of, the proof of payments, to say, look, he does have some kind of a case here. But as I was listening to the responses, Shadrack Sibiya was very emotional. I'm the one who helped AKA's case, and I'm the one who did this. Some other people also did interviews. Paul O'Sullivan said on the day that in the short space of time, he has been able to disprove all of the allegations that had been made by General Mkhwanazi. I was like, it's been 3 hours. How could you have in 3 hours disproved the existence of a cartel, the relationship within Brown Mogotsi and Minister Mchunu, the various things that have been mentioned here these are not the types of things you'd be able to disprove in a space of 3 hours, even if you were a forensic investigator. So it made me think that thou dost protest too much, as the saying goes. So that already, I think, to me indicated that, okay, there's something here. But aside from that, there is the lived experience, and anecdote is not evidence. But in the South African experience, we know that crime is pervasive and various people do various things to deal with crime, whether it's the neighborhood interventions, the community policing forums, whether it's all of these private security companies that are running up and down all of the streets. Houses have got panic buttons. People have installed cameras. The windows have all manner of bars and fences and all types of things, trellis doors and all of these things. Over the years, we know how much people have been spending just anecdotally on security, home security. We know how people have to drive and what kind of safety precautions everyone is told to take when they're driving. There is this pervasive fear of criminals, and there's also an understanding that a lot of the crime that is perpetrated on the streets, in the homes, is organized. It's systemic. There's a methodology. You can tell that these are not just chances. These are people who are experienced in doing this. I mean, they're even hijacking electric cars now, and the rate at which cars get stripped, now cars don't need to have one tracker, they need to have 3 trackers in order for them to have a chance to be discovered, because these professionals know how to remove the tracker, know how to strip the car for parts. We know all of this already. And in as much as there's an anecdotal element of that, it is corroborated by the crime stats themselves. So it's not just that the lived experience can be just, rubbish. You say, no, that only happened to you. And then if you then look at the crime stats in certain neighborhoods, the Cape Flats, we know how violent they are. We know how violent certain communities are. We know about the existence of Inkabi. We know historically, Mandy Winner wrote a book about the killing of Kebble. You would read stories there about how security companies were being used to procure firearms, being used in the underworld, those same firearms, how there was co-option of particular police units. You look at the reporting around the Cato Manor unit, etc. So some of these things have been in the public domain for a very long time. And when Mkhwanazi is then bringing them up to say, here is the latest iteration of this, many people were like, yeah, we do know what has been happening in Tshwane. We do know what has been happening in Mamelodi. We do know about these characters. So all of that, I think, was something that made the moment bigger.
Yeah.
In part 1, I mentioned that people were sad, or rather not sad, they were almost nonchalant in the engagement of the policy issues around crime, even though they were very concerned about how they experience crime in their personal lives, because they didn't feel like they could change anything. Before I came through, I was looking at the crime stats. The World Economic Forum used to do this ranking of countries. They kind of moved away from that in the Global Competitiveness Report. But here are the crime rankings in South Africa. Organized crime was ranked at 135 out of 141 countries. Homicide was ranked at 128 out of 141 countries that they were ranking at the time. Terrorism incidents, obviously low, but they were looking at it in a different way. 109 out of 141 countries. Reliability of police service, 121 out of 141. The country at the time in 2019 was ranked 60th overall. But if you look at the institution column, these rankings for security were very low in terms of those 4 things that they were looking at. Now, when you then consider that security, healthcare, and skills were the lowest ranking areas for South Africa, you immediately begin to see why the Mkhwanazi press conference would have really had salience with the public, because they have an experience of all of these things.
Yeah, because we can't say that the politicians didn't know, because just a month or so before Mkhwanazi's press conference, our president was in the White House.
Yes.
Telling Donald Trump that, no, we are not just killing white people, we're killing everybody. It might be the most embarrassing moment that I've had as a South African. Then you've got Singisa Losi from
the union,
Kusatu,
yes,
saying, oh, not only that, you should see what we do to grannies in the townships. I mean, it was the most despicable moment, the most cringeworthy moment as a South African. And some South Africans treated that as a triumph. But the point is that Our politicians can't say, we didn't know there was crime.
Yeah.
We had our own president telling the president of America that our crime's just out of control, sir. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, and give us Starlink and we'll
Yeah.
solve it. Yeah. So I think that's what really made that issue explosive in the public domain. And I think there was almost a hope, I think, that people would lose interest or something, but because crime affects everyone in this in so many ways, there was never going to be a loss of interest. The lack of interest initially in the politics of crime was that people didn't think there was anything that could be done. But then Mkhwanazi then acts as a proxy where they think, okay, but maybe something can be done. Maybe these cartels can be held accountable. Maybe we can get to the bottom of some of this stuff. And then when the Madlanga Commission starts, then you really get to have an appreciation that they do have evidence to back up what they're talking about. That the decision, because all of this happens in July, but the trigger event actually happened on the 31st of December. And some of the events predated last December in terms of the 6th of December raid at the Katiso Molefe house and also at the Vusi Matlala house, right? That really set things in motion. But as you listen to the testimonies, you begin to have an appreciation that, hang on, there is something here. Because firstly, the counterintelligence operation, in fact, before them, you have police officers who are able to solve or to get strong, evidence that the Aman Swat murder was as a result of the actions of Katiso Molefe. So he was killed in April of 2024. They locate the vehicles, they get the video footage, they geolocate the cell phones because these guys have been sloppy, a car has broken down. They're able to get all of the persons of interest, then discover that one of the persons of interest is a detective. The other person of interest is this individual, Katiso Molefe, they're working with. They're able to prove quite solidly that this individual was involved and was the paymaster in the killing of Aman Swat. Then they start to bump into interference as they are now trying to prosecute the matter because Katiso Molefe gets bail, they are being intimidated in the courts, and these are police officers who are just trying to execute their line of duty. Then at some point that gets escalated to the point where it is now in the hands of the counterintelligence in Gauteng. And then they then get to the point where they can now arrest Katiso Molefe and try to get his son, and his son gets tipped off. He's still at large right now, and also Vusi Matlala. Then in the weeks following that, you then see messages from Brown Mogotsi to Minister Mkhunu, messages from Brown Mogotsi to Vusi Matlala, trying to find solutions, trying to find ways to prevent these police officers from doing their job. And what that culminates in is the decision of 31 December, where they then say, just disband the PKTT, the political killings task team. It's the problem. It's the source of the efficiency. Get rid of the, cut off the head. Yeah. This whole thing will go away. And then they try to deal with these issues internally within the police up until the press conference happens. Then we see at the Madlanga Commission that, hey, they have proof. They have messages between Brown Mogotsi and Vusi Matlala, Brown Mogotsi and other individuals, Vusi Matlala and Calvin Rafadi, Vusi Matlala and the head of the Hawks in KZN, Vusi Matlala, I think that is Sinona, who was also working in Pretoria at the police station where all of Vusi Matlala's cases were withdrawn. And Vusi Matlala is calling Sinona a brother, and saying, this is like a brother to me. How is he a brother to you when in your whole life you have been participating in criminality, and his whole life he has been participating in policing work? How do you build a brotherhood on that basis? So that to me is something which has been very strong. I was listening recently to a radio station where one of the analysts was saying, well, why don't the commissioners grill, Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi and them very hard? Why do they, just let them give their version? And I was thinking to myself, well, the answer should be evident to you, is because they've looked at the body of work that they presented and they could not find much fault with it. You're only as strong as your case. And sometimes in a cross-examination, as well as in a commission or even in a court process, the pushback is going to be contingent on how many gaps the people see in your story and version. So if they can see that you have actually presented a compelling case without many gaps, they will not push back. In fact, they did ask a lot of tough questions at the beginning to say, how do we know these messages are authentic? How do we know these proof of payments are authentic? And some of the evidence that was being presented had been actually sourced by the commission itself. Some of the bank records, the commission asked the banks to say, hey, we're investigating this thing the president has put into motion. We have these powers, give us these bank records. And the bank said, here you go. And then you'd find someone like, what's his name, this Brigadier Mkhwanazi of the Ekurhuleni Metro Police Department. I think he did not know.
He's the bad Mkhwanazi.
Yes. Yeah, I call him Shady Mkhwanazi when I speak in jest. He did not know that they had the bank records. So the evidence leader asked him, hey, did you take money from, I think it was a guy called Mike or whatever. He's very happy. No, Mike never gave me money. I never got any money from Mike. Then she's like, okay, but here's some bank records here. He quickly rushes to drink his water. He's drinking so much water. And I think the cost of bottled water in Tshwane has gone up as a result of the amount of water.
I thought he was going to drown on stage.
It did look that way. So when he's presented with the evidence of the monies that he received from Vusi Matlala, he's taken aback. He's like, well, I had these problems I needed to solve. Vusi Matlala helped me. In fact, he even helped me with much more than this. And I'm like, I don't know what kind of a concession you think you're making here. But when you look at the reasons why certain people got a lot of pushback, is because at that point, the evidence leader has looked at and prepared your statement. And they make an ascertainment that this statement is bad. Objectively and evidentiary, it's lacking in a lot of information. The people who came with good evidence did not get a lot of pushback. The people who came with shaky stories did get a lot of pushback. If you look at Brown Mogotsi, he says, I was a member of the Umkhonto weSizwe. And the commissioners just do the math. You say you are a member of Umkhonto weSizwe in 1993. Firstly, the maths doesn't add up in the sense that the organization was disbanded the year that you said you joined. So if you joined in 93, what were you joining? And in addition, you were 13. How did you join this organization as a 13? You were barely a teenager. It is unlikely that a grade 8 boy will say, you know what, I don't want to be a soccer player. I want to join Umkhonto weSizwe. That is what I want for my 13th birthday. There is no realm of the imagination where that is realistic. Then he says, well, if you think about it, I have 2 birth certificates actually, and I was 15 when I joined the Umkhonto weSizwe, which didn't exist in 1993. So that should explain it. What 15-year-old in 1993 was doing? So you have to get pushback from the commissioners when you are giving a version which is full of nonsense, which is full of contradictions, which is full of lies. Even the evidence leaders, they could pick up quite easily that, hey, you did a court application, Brown Mogotsi Foundation, on an urgent basis when there was no urgency, and you lied to the court around the basis of why you were making the urgent application. When we now look at the full body of evidence that we have in our possession, you got this money from these individuals at this time, you go to the court at this time, you were aware that the tender had been awarded at this time, you went and you misled the court around the urgency. Otherwise, the court will never have heard your issue. Then you block this tender. And as soon as you block the tender, you then fall away from all of the litigation. You have no further interest, but you were consulting with Vusi Matlala. Enter Hangwani Maumela later to make a bid for the same tender. Fortunately, he didn't get it, but he's still trying to get Northwest tenders within the Department of Health. And even this year in 2025, his company was still bidding for tenders in Northwest. So when you get all of that information, then you can appreciate why the evidence leaders would push back on certain people. One guy gets in there, one of the generals, he says, I never sent WhatsApp messages on the WhatsApp group. And Advocate Lee Siegels is like, no, but you did. You literally did. I have the messages in front of me. How is she supposed to let that slide? Everything that Mkhwanazi was saying, he was able to say, I cannot prove this. This individual is going to come and explain that evidence. When the individual comes in, he says, listen, here's the ballistic report. Here's what we determined in KZN around this ballistic information. We were able to get the serial number. We were able to link this gun to 30 killings. Here's the evidence. Here's the result. What is the commission supposed to say? No, but why? Why are you? They can't. But if you get there and then you say, listen, I am a contact agent. General Mkhwanazi works for the, what did he say, CIA? And so does the king.
So does
The king studied in America. You think all of that studying in America was not CIA sponsored?
Yeah.
The commission has to ask. Madlanga asked him, I was also in America. Are you trying to say that I'm also a CIA agent? I mean, what were they supposed to do with that evidence? They were supposed to give the hot grilling that some of the people deserved. And the evidence that has been presented so far, as things stand, seems to me to corroborate in the main most of the things that General Mkhwanazi has said. And the behavior of some of the witnesses made me think that towards the end of December, they were running away from the commission. Because we had General Sinona, I think, say, I'm not ready. I need to speak to my lawyers a little bit. Then we had General Libya claiming that he didn't get the paperwork. So, well, I didn't get the paperwork. I need to speak to you guys in next year. Then we had Shadrach Sibia saying, classic excuse, the high school excuse. I'm sick. I have a sick note, commissioners. Please don't ask me to come through before you write your first preliminary report. 3 people of interest who have been implicated in big ways saying that we can't make it to the commission before the interim report. I think they picked up, and I picked up, that the commission was actually working quite effectively. That issue that you were talking about in part 1 about management and mismanagement and inefficiencies. Commissioner Madlanga seems to me to be a very efficient court, leader, if you will. He's very interested in time. If you're late even by a minute, explain yourself. Why are you late? Even the minister had to explain why he was late. He was finishing on time. And the way that they were operating, I picked up that the transcripts were being prepared contemporaneously on the day, and they were reflecting after they closed the commission to the public on all of the testimonies. Because sometimes you would see the commissioner saying, from my notes from yesterday, I have some follow-up questions, suggesting that she did sit with this throughout the evening to try to think, what else do I have to ask? What clarifications do I need? So those morning sessions became important because they'd show you what overnight homework had been done by the commissioners. And the fact that they closed it on the 5th, I thought to myself initially, I was like, that's early. Why would they close it so early? Then I realized they closed it so early because they want to be on time for the 17th. So they're going to take that extra 12 days to make sure that they can submit to the president a report that is thorough, comprehensive, and on time. So that whole issue that you were talking about people being on time and everything, I thought I also got from there. So I must give them credit for that.
Yeah, and of course, when one puts it next to the Zondo Commission, you see the real value in something. You're a man with legal experience. I'm just a interested onlooker. But the decision now that looks so ridiculous in the Zondo Commission was to have one commissioner, Zondo.
Yes.
He sat there. He had to take all that information. He had to synthesize everything. He asked some pertinent questions, but he was one person.
Yeah.
The value of having those other commissioners, I can't believe how that is. You've now got those 3 commissioners, and they have spurred each other on, led ably by Madlanga, who must be a terrible man to have to face because he kind of looks like he's on your side, sort of thing.
Till he asks.
He's got a disarming way of engaging until he absolutely wraps his around you and squeezes the life out of his people. But those co-commissioners have really helped, haven't they?
It was a good decision. And I think part of it, and this is going to just be a little bit harsh, but it's part of it, is that the practice management, which I think is the formal term, that is being shown at this commission is much better. I think that, Justice Zondo always struggled with managing the practice and making sure that judgments come, expeditiously, that everything is managed on time. So I think that the Zondo Commission did overwhelm him because it's thousands of documents. You're the only person there who's at the helm of this thing. Of course, you get a lot of help, but having 2 practitioners who are practicing advocates and having, Commissioner Madlanga, who I think is stronger at practice management, that I think has led to this kind of but the definitely having 2 additional heads helping you changes the load. And I think also from the evidence leader side, they were learnings, because some of them were in the Zondo Commission. I think Charles Carlson was also there. So there were learnings, I think, from the Zondo Commission, because in as much as there was never a public concession from the people involved in the Zondo Commission that, yeah, we messed up many things, they wasted time, and we haven't really got a lot of remedies out of our actions. I think they did reflect, behind the scenes to be like, okay, Zondo was a disaster. How do we do this differently? And how do we do this in such a way that, one, we can be on time, deliver this to the president where he has room to take the interventions that are necessary, but also how can we make sure that the issues that we are trying to determine or get to the bottom of are actually determined and gotten to the bottom of.
Now, like all South Africans, we reached the stage where a report's been sent to the president, who now, the fear is that he sits with us now and does nothing, because that's kind of been his modus operandi. Firstly, two questions from where you sit. Is there going to be what is in that report other than sort of the issues we've discussed, but in more detail?
Yeah, so I think there are going to be some questions of law, and there's going to be some questions around remedies and interventions or recommendations around what to do with particular individuals. So the questions of law would be the administrative law questions. So number one, was the decision to disband the political killings task team lawful decision? Were the reasons that were given adequate reasons? Was the minister empowered to make the decisions? There's a lot of things that you need to look at when you are reviewing a decision, an administrative action, which is what the minister took when he disbanded the political killings task team. So then you look at rationality, you look at lawfulness, you look at, was there an abuse of discretion? Was there an ulterior motive? Were the reasons sufficient? That is one basket of issues that they're going to be looking at. Then come into the issues around, let's say, criminal law, and whether or not there are enough elements of a crime proven as they pertain to certain individuals, because part of the terms of reference is that they can make recommendations around prosecutions and dismissals. So you may find that they may say, for instance, Imogen Mashazi should be considered for criminal prosecution. So and so should be considered for criminal prosecution. So and so should not be occupying this particular position while these allegations and investigations continue, because some of the people who've been implicated here are still very influential police officers. You may have, General Sibia suspended and Minister Mkhunu also on the bench, but within the generals that have been mentioned, several of them are still, working. Then the question then becomes, what impact could they have on ongoing investigations? Because if you remember, witness B and A mentioned that they went to a particular house that is owned by a notorious businessman, and at that particular house they found many generals, and they were being propositioned to take a bribe. And then witness B boldly said, but what's going on here? Why are you having these discussions with us in this manner? And she was very bold, and I think in so doing push back. But we did see that Katiso Molefe was being visited by police officers in prison who were trying to deliver him, tracksuits and food and all of that. So there may be recommendations there around the status of various individuals. Then there may be some policy recommendations around, maybe this particular legislation needs to be amended to include this. So for instance, IDAC, for example, was prosecuting or is still in the process of prosecuting General Kumalo for this HR matter. There may be a recommendation there around the powers of IDAC. Even Parliament was now asking, okay, we do need this institution, we do need to close the gap, but it also looks as if it has now been abused, because you've got this individual who does not have a blemish on his criminal record, has been in the police for 30 or so years, no blemish on his record. He hires somebody who's a mechatronics expert from BMW, not him directly, but his team does. They say they have a need. They seem to be involved at the same time with the prosecution of Katiso Molefe. And then at the time that they are moving on Katiso Molefe, all of a sudden, a case which has been opened at multiple police stations finds itself in the hands of IDAC, and all of a sudden IDAC is moving aggressively on this issue, subpoenaing the National Commissioner for an HR matter, which does not seem to be in the remit of IDAC. And then IDAC then says that, but it's state capture. It's just state capture before the capture. So we are arresting him before he's able to capture anything, which is also not how the legal system operates. We don't preemptively arrest anybody. That is one of the shortcomings of a rights-based system, is that we cannot predictively arrest anybody. But having said that, there may be some recommendations around those types of interventions, because some of the issues which came up even around the judiciary, if you recall, the issue of bail. So right now there's a popular musician called Shebe Shit or something like that. Now he brandished a firearm at somebody, and he went through a bail hearing and his bail was denied. You have Vusi Matlala. He went through a bail hearing for attempted murder. His bail was denied. But Katiso Molefe is accused of murder in common purpose with other individuals. What was presented by the investigating officers to the courts, we now have had sight of. They were able to show cell phone tower data, video footage of vehicles that he owned at the site of the murder. They were able to show that his relative was working at Transnet and was the one who procured the tender. They were able to show motive. They were able to show various elements of the crime, which, as a Schedule 6 offense, should have led to bail being denied. But Katiso Molefe, on various occasions, has been able to get bail. Somebody who also has prior convictions for drug related crimes and gun possession, somebody who had fraudulent identity documents. So when you put that all together, he should not have gotten bail. The fact that warrant officers are raising the issue to say, why does it look as if the system is being manipulated and abused at the magistrate level and some of the judges, because we are seeing individuals who never should have gotten bail. If you consider the fact that this musician doesn't get bail, Vusi Matlala doesn't get bail, how does Katiso Molefe get bail?
Yeah.
Legally, I cannot explain it to you. If I go back to what we were taught in law school, some of the judgments around bail, this doesn't make sense. So they may make some recommendations around these issues where the judiciary may be getting weakened by criminal elements. Even if you read some of the there's this organization that looks at organized crime around the world. I can't remember the name right now. They also identify some of these risks and the fact that gangs have infiltrated the police. They've infiltrated the prison. They may also be, it could be intimidation. It could be a mix of factors. Maybe these judges made bad decisions, were involved in gambling, etc., and then those bad decisions were then used against them. But they may make some recommendations there. Now the challenge is, we now have to play a guessing game, because the presidency has said they're not going to make it public, right? Everything thus far has been seen by the public. The presidency said that the investigations are ongoing, which is fair to say investigations are ongoing, but I don't think that the commissioners would, in the interim report, make findings or recommendations about the parts of the testimony that are still inconclusive. I think they would make findings and recommendations about what is conclusive. And now, because everything is now going to be under this veil, we won't be able to tell, one, what is a reasonable time for the president to apply his mind, because historically sometimes he's applied his mind for longer than most people would think is a rational time for an executive who has a plethora of experts working for him to actually be able to apply his mind and reach a conclusion. And then the second thing is, so we don't know, firstly, how long does it take to apply your mind, and we won't be able to fully ascertain which decisions now are being made as a result of the report.
Yeah.
Because some decisions have already been made. After the presentation, which was made by witness A, B, C, and D, particularly D, who got killed now, Marius van der Merwe, he got killed for some of his testimony. We saw people being reinstated in the Ekurhuleni Metro Police. We saw some people being removed from the Ekurhuleni Metro Police. Already, Shady Mkhwanazi, Julius Mkhwanazi was already on suspension. But now, how will you know whether different appointments or removals of certain personnel are as a result of the, volume 1 of the Madlanga Commission, or as a result of people preemptively trying to cover up, or people preemptively making decisions? That makes it difficult for the public to be able to really hold the government accountable, and makes transparency, harder. Because now, let's say the next report comes out also on time in June, then now we're in a situation where the president says, well, now, this is the full report. I need to apply my mind some more on this full report. Does that mean we will see the report only in January of 2027? It can be a challenge. I would have preferred a situation where the report is released. I don't think the commissioners would have put anything there that is inconclusive, and the public would then know where the commission stands, what their thinking is, and also have a good comprehensive summary, because the reports do give a summary, because not everyone has been able to follow intimately everything that has been happening. So I think it's a disservice to the democratic project for this to remain under wraps, so to speak.
And this is what is making the work that people like yourself is doing so much more important, that we keep asking these questions as to, this is a can that cannot be kicked down the road.
And there's urgency, right? Because people are being killed.
Absolutely.
DJ Warris just recently got killed. Marius van der Merwe got killed. We know that Babita was killed. Mpho Mafole was killed. So what Mkhwanazi presented on the 6th of July, and why I think there was pressure on the president to do the commission and even say there was an interim report, is because there was an appreciation that this is urgent. We mustn't forget the heart of the allegation is that there is a cartel that is operating in a variety of industries. They are trading drugs, they are trading firearms, they are hijacking cars, they are transporting those cars across borders, they are kidnapping, they are participating in the looting of government contracts. They also have some control and influence over politicians. These police officers are saying, we are trying to arrest these people, and now they are interfering. And we've seen how those interferences have possibly played out. So the urgency of all of this is such that it's not something that can be kicked down the road, I think, or kicked down the road in a way that will put this issue to bed. Because if this cartel now has a window period where they think that they've got 6 months to really do everything that they can to cover up, to deal with witnesses, to deal with any outstanding issues, they may very well use that window period in a way that defeats the ends of justice, which is why it's important for all of this stuff to come out as fast as possible, and why I think the idea of the interim report was even mooted in the first place.
And we can be rest assured to everybody watching that people like Jamie and even our little bit, we will be continuing to add pressure, which then puts pressure on mainstream media to keep the pressure on. Because I see, once again, just thinking about it, the stark difference between the Zondo Commission outcome and, okay, we're not at the outcome stage yet with the Madlanga Commission, but we're at an interim stage. And I think that if I could put one word to describe the Zondo Commission at its conclusion, was almost there was a sense of relief. All the stuff is out. We know that Zuma was a bad guy. We know that he captured the state. There's been books written about it, but they're all gone. Was kind of like, that was almost enough action in that whole commission, was to say, well, at least he's gone, and Brian Molefe is gone, and Lucky Montana's gone, and blah, blah, blah. And Gavin Watson's not a very good driver, and we could at least have some closure, as it were, because they were physically removed. I think we've learned from that. We have now, with the Madlanga Commission, not relief, but expectation. In actual fact, the fact that a report is out doesn't make us feel more inclined to say, oh, well, at least something's been done. It's in fact making us more anxious to say, what now? Right. So the expectation is flipping high from all of us.
It is high. And it's because also the stakes are high. I mean, not only have we seen those witnesses dying, not only have we seen the looting of the hospitals, but also we've come to appreciate the extent of the conduct of these types of cartels and how violent they can be. So it's not going to be enough, I think, just to simply have a report and even a few arrests, because people want to see real justice for the many victims here. The challenge now is that it seems like this is going to touch a lot of politicians. And I don't know how they themselves, because at some point you have as a leader to try to think of the off-ramp. How do I off-ramp this? How do I really bring people to a point where they feel that we can finally move on from this? I'm not sure what the answer is going to be.
Look, the point is that the thing has to, we have to know what's in the reports,
Yeah.
and the thing has to continue and run its course. And obviously, just at that time, it's going to be around the time of the local government election, and people got to know, for example, in Ekurhuleni, that is run by the ANC and the EFF, that they, under their watch, this was allowed to happen at local government level, and therefore it should affect the way you vote if you live in Ekurhuleni. If you're happy for this to continue, vote for the ANC and EFF. If you're not, consider that, that this was there. Then we have to look at, there's two things I want to touch on. One is that there's still a lot of people that should have appeared.
Yes.
That haven't.
Yeah.
I know you, and so do I, we make this point of Maumela, the invisible man. Molefe, it's a mystery as to the bail situation, that Katiso Molefe got bail. But Maumela hasn't even been spoken to by the looks of things. His car's got taken.
Yeah.
Maumela, you can rent a car from Pace Car Rental, get a discount.
Do they have Lamborghinis?
I'm sure they'll get a Lamborghini for you. We'll get you a discount. Use the code SONA. So he's a bit short on transport. I don't think he's using taxis at the moment. So Pace, that's the place to
Pace
go to.
got a blue car for
They
you.
got a blue car for you. Maybe a Toyota Taz, but it's blue.
He's definitely not going to get in a Corolla and go to the airport.
Yeah. Right. Maumela, the invisible man. And then, of course, the big fish, the name comes up every now and again, a certain CEO of the country, and that is President Cyril Ramaphosa. Did he know about these decisions to disband the task team? It seems to be unclear. Mkhunu says he sort of mentioned it, and it's sort of like it's me and us around the president. Right?
Yes.
He didn't know Maumela. Then there's videos of him knowing Maumela. Then, I do kind of remember. This is a guy with something to hide.
Well, you know what? That is beyond our pay grade right now. But hopefully, certain people do need to be called. So I think they seem to have messages between Hangwani Maumela and Vusi Matlala. They almost asked...
they were business partners.
Yes. So they almost asked Brown Mogotsi, I think, just to let us know that they have them. Advocate Charles Carson asked Brown Mogotsi, because clearly there was a link between Matlala Mogotsi and Hangwani Maumela as it pertains to the Northwest tender, where his foundation was involved. He asked him, listen, why is Vusi Matlala explaining to Hangwani Maumela about the SAPS tender and reporting to him about every payment that has been made around the SAPS tender? That, I thought, was a curious question from Advocate Charles Carson. And it suggested he's read all his messages. He probably knows the answer. And Hangwani may be best placed to speak to that. And Brown Mogotsi says, well, I don't know why they're talking about that. Those are not messages between me and anybody. Ask them why they're talking about that. And I thought they probably will ask them why they were talking about that. And they will probably call. I don't think that the commission will call Vusi Matlala necessarily, because this pending trial situation may have different connotations outside of a political process like the Ad Hoc Committee. But I think they may call Hangwani Maumela to explain his messages, because he's not right now awaiting trial, not charged of anything, but clearly he's an implicated person and a key person of interest in all of this. He may have to explain that. Then you've got other figures who still have to come and explain. SONA, Sibia, Libya, they all have to come and explain. But what you're alluding to, which I think also now needs a clear answer, is the president's understanding of, number one, what Minister Mkhunu told him, and number two, what National Commissioner Fani Masemola told him. Those two versions have some irreconcilable differences, because Masemola said, I did not approve of this, and I spoke to the president about it. He doesn't give an indication as to how the president viewed it and what was in the president's mind when he had the meeting with him. Mkhunu suggests that the president was supporting him, but he was also very cautious to say the president said he noted the decision to disband the political task team and my explanation for it, which also I thought was a curious way for the president to respond, if indeed that is the manner in which he responded. So he may now have to explain, right, what was your reasoning when you set up the process in motion for the events that led to the setting up of the political killings task team? In your understanding, is the IMC the entity that is empowered to disband the political killings task team? In your understanding, does the IMC have to meet all the time for the task team to be operational? In your understanding, was
the
the
interministerial
committee that Senzo Mkhwanazi said was no longer existing,
Yeah.
and because it was no longer existing, he then was empowered to unilaterally then disband the task team, which was one of the questions which was being posed to him quite frequently. And then it was shown to him that other interministerial task teams had operated across administrations. So his argument that it ceased to exist simply because there was a new administration is one that is open to real scrutiny and critique. And the president may have to explain his understanding as the head of the executive around that issue, along with his position on, one, the disbanding of the task team and this difference of opinion that was expressed to him between Senzo Mkhwanazi as well as the what's his name, National Commissioner Fani Masemola. Then he may have to also explain something which came up not in the Madlanga Commission, but came up in the Ad Hoc Committee. In the Ad Hoc Committee, one of the questions which was asked to General Fani, who was the head of procurement, was what is his relationship with Benjani Chauke, who is the advisor to the president. And in Jeff Wick's book, the other link between Maumela and the president, because Jeff Weeks explained two things, and we focused a lot of time, I think, mainstream more than anybody, focused on the relative relationship, because what Jeff Weeks says is that, okay, Hangwani Maumela is the nephew through this aunt, through the marriage. That is one thing that Jeff Weeks says. But the other thing that he says is Hangwani Maumela and Benjani Chauke are close associates, because when he went to the property and was scouting the property, he noticed vehicles that were security vehicles, marked security vehicles. He sent them to the Inatis system, got back information that they were under the presidential detail. And that was, I think, for him, the smoking gun that said, hey, these vehicles are linked to the presidency. I already have also information saying that Hangwani Maumela and Benjani Chauke have a relationship. Now, the question that gets asked to General Fani is, does he know Benjani Chauke? He says, he sent me a message once saying we should have a meeting. I don't know him that well. That may have to be established, because it seemed what was being suggested or being tested by the Ad Hoc Committee in those few questions was, hey, is it the case that you were put into SAPS as the head of procurement to actually approve this tender and give it to Hangwani Maumela and Vusi Matlala, with Vusi Matlala being the front for the SAPS tender, with him then having to explain to Hangwani Maumela every payment? And is there a collaboration then between Hangwani Maumela, Benjani Chauke, and if there is such a collaboration, does that then go back to the presidency through Benjani Chauke? That's something that has not been tested, may need to be established. They didn't push it a lot. Fani himself didn't explain his full relationship with Benjani Chauke. A lot of questions left there, because he said he met him through a mutual friend. He got that message saying we should meet up for coffee. Nothing came out of it, he said. But it left a curious question mark. And it may very well be that the question gets put to the president to say, are you aware of any relationship between Benjani Chauke and General Fani, any relationship between Benjani Chauke and Hangwani Maumela? And Benjani Chauke himself may also have to be called in to answer some questions around these relationships that have been only thus far suggested, but not extrapolated or fully explained. So we may get some answers from that set of questions, but it may very well also be that they choose not to call the president, but maybe they'll call Benjani Chauke and Hangwani Maumela, because there may be no appetite to take it up until that point. I mean, in the back of every senior legal practitioner's mind is the soft side of rule of law, because in as much as you want to make sure everyone is equal before the law and that the legal system functions properly, you can be also aware of the unintended consequences of over pursuing certain forms of litigation. So if you are a constitutional court, if you're a constitutional court judge or maybe you're the chief of the Constitutional Court, you may also be thinking around, okay, I don't want to take a decision or allow for certain cases that will necessarily lead to mayhem within the country. So in the back of everyone's mind, and this is not going to be expressed and may only be discussed over dinner and maybe suggested and hinted in certain discussions, and is how much accountability can you get from this whole moment without collapsing the country? Because let's assume that it does go all the way to the top. At what point do you want to also be aware that, hey, there is a coalition government, and if we were to hold full accountability, this would lead to a collapse of the government and lead to chaos in South Africa because of uncertainty, alternatives not being attractive, and that would then deteriorate rule of law. These are jurisprudential questions that rarely get discussed in the open, especially when there are hard cases such as this. So it may very well be that we may get maximum accountability at the level of Hangwani Maumela, but we may never get to know the full extent of this particular question.
And of course, South Africa's got a long history of that. We did a lot of that in the early 90s, where a lot of legal issues were kicked to the curb in the national interest.
Yeah, TRC.
Just easier for these things. Even prior to the TRC,
yes, you're right.
You kind of know that this guy's a bad guy, but if he's in trouble, the whole process might collapse. So a lot of stuff kind of gets swept under, South Africa, we've got lots of space under our carpets, boy.
The nation building folder.
The nation building folder, yeah. Which brings us to the point of the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee, which has sort of been there. It's been fun and games. Is it achieving anything other than showing people's political bent, as it were?
So I think it has been useful in some instances because, for instance, they were able to hold Andrea Johnson to account for some of the decisions she had made. And I don't think she was privy to information that the ad hoc committee already had. So if you remember when Andrea Johnson, she asked to go there, which I think was a mistake on her part because it has perhaps limited her career in terms of promotion to be the...
She heads up IDAC.
Yes, she heads up IDAC. She also wanted to be, I think... and the head of the NDPP and the NPA. So when she goes there, she gets asked these questions about her husband, Junaid Johnson, and they say to her, listen, what's your relationship with this guy? She says, that's my husband. Have you spoken about all of these things? She said, no, I never discuss work issues with this other lawyer who is also involved in, the world of my world, which I thought, this is not honest. I can understand, a CEO of maybe a technology company not discussing the merits or demerits of his new technology with his wife, but I can't see that happening where both of you are tech experts in your own rights. But she makes this argument that she didn't discuss these things. But what was damning for her, in as much as that other information was not believable, what was damning was that she then says, she was then asked about her role in the appointment of her husband at the time when they were both in the Scorpions, and she recused herself from his interview, but was involved in the whole process where he was being selected, or one of the candidates for selection for the job that he ended up getting. And then that information then becomes valuable and even gets used in the panel interviews for the NDPP because she gets asked further questions around that. And I think the panel was not impressed necessarily with her answers. That's an example where they were able to get additional information which we didn't have. I think the same applies to Cedric Nkabinde, who went there the first time, and they were like, no, this is a rubbish statement. You've not really prepared yourself adequately to speak to us. He came back and then he gave a lot of information which will be helpful. And what we then saw was that the Madlanga commissioners were actually also following some of the testimony which was being given at the ad hoc committee and also just being made in public. So it then became a supporting role, where there's a through pass or an alley whoop, depending on which sport you prefer, where this information is now being used contemporaneously in another forum to test the strength of the evidence of the witnesses. So it has had value in that respect, and I think will continue to have some value. Unfortunately, I think that they've lost, or maybe because of the lack of adequate resourcing, because now they are saying that they don't have as many resources as the Madlanga Commission. We're seeing that they are lacking a forensic capacity, because if you remember, Honorable James said she had to go to the police station herself to check some of the issues pertaining to Vusi Matlala. They had a heated exchange about that. I trust that she got the accurate information. I don't think she was lying. I think she caught Matlala off guard, which is why he lost his temper. I also don't think that members of parliament owe full deference to some of these witnesses in the manner that maybe even in the Ad Hoc Committee they may be owed. If you look at congressional hearings in America, it's not a walk in the park for witnesses, because politicians have a little bit more room to push you and to try to probe some of your answers in a way that a justice and the commission may not have the room to. But they've been highly differential in general to everybody. So I think there's value to what they're doing. I do think that at times the political positioning and the gameplay does avail itself and show itself, because some of the questions that the MK party has been asking are historic, but they've actually proved to be quite useful, because this is not happening in a vacuum, and in as much as the MK is trying to exonerate Jacob Zuma and say, hey, some of the things you thought Jacob Zuma was doing were not wrong, because look at what we're hearing about this guy now. And when it was the Zuma days, you thought this guy was a hero. And some of it you're like, hey, actually, hang on. This is an important question, but it's coming from a political motivation. Nonetheless, it is important for us to properly understand how different individuals have been extremely influential within the NPA without being in the NPA. If that is true of what Paul O'Sullivan's role has been, it's important for us to understand that, because he has been in the South African security cluster as a voice, an influencer, a forensic investigator, a contributor, without always being within proper government. And if he is somebody who is giving advice to the president and the minister of police, it's important for us to understand the role which he's doing it in. Where I think they've had a shortcoming is within managing their timetable and managing when they will get a report out. In terms of now what happens after, I've been thinking the ANC members in the commission, in the Ad Hoc Committee, have actually been very harsh. They've been scathing.
Yeah.
And then I begin to think, what does this mean actually for the president? And what does this mean for some of the people here who are associated with the ANC one way or another? Because it looks as if the ANC members in the committee may also make adverse findings. So if there was an expectation that they would maybe protect some people, it doesn't right now look that way. And if they were to flip at a later stage, we will be confused by that, because we saw the types of questions that they were asking Sibiya and other people as well. And it was not a walk in the park. In fact, surprisingly, the DA at times was asking the softest questions.
Well, they've been docile.
Yes, they've been. And it all makes you wonder about where this is all going to end. So short answer is they have been valuable, but some of your critique is valid, that the political motivations have had a play. But I think perhaps their biggest shortcoming is merely that the speaker did not give them all of the resources that they need to be able to operate maybe as efficiently as the Madlanga Commission, because we've heard them say that, Andrense is limited by the fact that he's only got the 2 additional counsel helping him, and they don't have a lot of back-end support. Hopefully they can fix that, because it will be important for their process to be as robust as the Madlanga Commission process. What could end up happening, though, because the president can sit and apply his mind on the Madlanga report, the interim and final, he may not be able to sit on what Parliament produces as a report. So it may very well be that the Madlanga Commission gets to the finish line first, but in terms of results, it may very well be that Parliament then starts to produce some results first in terms of pushing for accountability, because they can release that report with or without the permission of the president.
Yes, because that report belongs to Parliament, not the president. And a lot of pressure on Soviet Lechanyani, who's heading it up, as to how he acts. He's looked like a guy in control.
Yeah, he's very good, I think, at this particular role, and has been able to manage some of the emotions. At the beginning I was like, oh, he's a bit too soft. But I thought, and I looked at it and I watched how he was able to soothe certain differences, because it could easily have gotten out of control. And he's able to manage a lot of those egos. And I think he definitely deserves a consideration in future for a certain cabinet position or so, because he has shown that he can definitely, lead a diverse team in a constructive fashion.
Well, we wait to hear if news starts emerging about the Madlanga report. We'll see what Parliament does, but it's given us a great catch-up of where we are. The one and only Mighti Jamie, he is the man to follow when these commissions kick off. In fact, just follow him in general, because some great information there. Jamie, you've been very generous with your time and your contribution to everybody there. I hope you see the value that this man brings and you subscribe to his channel, Mighti Jamie TV. Jamie, thanks for coming back to the State of the Nation, catching us up. To everybody out there, subscribe to the State of the Nation and support Pace Car Rental, and we'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.